Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a minute. I feel like I begin every video with that. So it's been a while since I made a video. I did put one up on New Year's Eve that some of you may have seen, and then I pulled it. I pulled it the next day because I felt it was a little self-indulgent. It was just me kind of blathering at a camera after I was a drink or two into my New Year's Eve. But I put it back up because I hadn't put any content up in a while, and I watched it again a couple days later, and I was like, yeah, this is okay, so I threw it back up on there. But today I'm going to try to get back into some kind of content. So you may notice the view's a little different. I've been rearranging some things. My wife and I are moving, selling our house. We're moving to another state. So that's taking up a lot of time, a lot of energy. The kids, of course, are taking up a lot of time and energy, and my day job has been very busy. So, and I'm still trying to work on some writing projects. It's slow going, but it's still in progress. So I haven't had a lot of time for philosophy videos, but we're going to get back into it. I also kind of wasn't entirely sure where I wanted to go after the Stoicism video. I've had a lot of fun doing these. They've been helpful for me. You guys have said that they've been good. I've gotten good feedback from you guys, so thank you. And it was kind of like, what do I want to do now? I knew generally where I wanted to go, but I had this thought the other day. I was thinking about the concept of Oikeosis. Someone asked me, I think, how do you spell that? Because they wanted to do more research, and I sent them a link. And I was thinking about this idea of Oikeosis that's so key to Stoicism. So just as a quick, so I'm gonna kind of riff on that a little bit. It's not going to be necessarily a deep dive into the Stoic concept of Oikeosis so much as I'm going to try to draw some parallels and then circle back around to maybe our modern predicament. So just as a quick review, the concept of Oikeosis is an axiomatic concept in Stoicism, meaning it's not something that's derived from observation so much, although you could say it is an observation of nature, but it's not so much an empirical truth as it's a grasping of an axiom, of a fundamental truth, which is that all living things attempt to make themselves at home or engaged in some process of making themselves feel at home, feel comfortable in the world, making the world or learning to feel or be at home in the world. So it's a hard term to translate. Oikios is something like home. So oikiosis is this like home-making quality. Oikios is the same root that we get the word economics, which originally came from the management of a household, an agricultural household. That's how Aristotle uses the term oikios. So household. So economics is really household management, or at least it was originally. It's generally not how we use it today. I like the term homesteading. So homesteading is this old concept that you'd go out into the wilderness and you'd have some land and then you'd set up a farm and you'd make it yours. And so I think of Oikeos as sort of homesteading. And everyone, human beings, we do that. Birds do that. Wolves do that. Wolves try to make the world more wolf-friendly. Humans try to make it more human-friendly. And so this is this fundamental motivation that drives living things in our interactions with the world. And there's a connection between this and Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia being the end goal of classic philosophy, whether it's Stoicism or Aristotelian thought, often translated as happiness. If you want to know more about this, you can watch my videos on Stoic physics and Stoic ethics. But Eudaimonia, this pursuit of a good or blessed spirit or mind, psyche, literally a good daimon, a good spirit. The word daimon in Greek is just means spirit. It can be used to mean one spirit, like a person's spirit, the daimon. It's like Socrates' daimon was his is referenced in the original dialogues. Or it can mean a sort of like an angel, like an intermediary being. There is a linguistic connection between the term daimon and our term demon. but it's roundabout. It's by way of sort of the early Christian authors referring to the philosophical schools in the negative, and also the Greek pagans in the negative, and so they recast this idea of daimon as demon. But originally, the terms angel and daimon are exactly the same term. Angel means something like messenger, and daimon is like a communicating intelligence. So it's the same word basically. So whether you translate Eudaimonia as good spirit in a very sort of modern sounding sense, like being of good spirit or good mind, or you can translate it in a very sort of mystical sense as being sort of one with the good angels of one's nature. I think that the word embraces all those concepts. So the link between Oikiosis and Eudaimonia is the goal of the Oikeosis process. One who has achieved Eudaimonia has also achieved Oikeosis. They're living, they're at home in the world. They do not feel alienated from their environment, from their experience. Obviously, different philosophical schools have different approaches to Eudaimonia. So we spoke at length about the Stoics, and their Eudaimonia is achieved entirely through a kind of inner emotional mastery. But regardless, I think if you take this concept of home, being at home in the world, homesteading your existence in the world, Eudaimonia is the feeling or the state of having either arrived or of doing it well, if you look at it as a process and not a state. So this is corollary to some other concepts that you'll find in various philosophical schools. And one of them that I think most people wouldn't think of as a related concept is Nietzsche's will to power. So will to power in Nietzschean thought is a difficult concept to grasp. It's sometimes thought of as something like like power over others, like it refers entirely to political power or to dominance. And if you actually read a fair amount of Nietzsche, you'll find that that's not what Nietzsche is talking about. Will to power is very much this idea of living things attempting to exert themselves and to home themselves, essentially to continue an increase of their own power. Will to power, it's not will to power for something else, it's will to power for its own sake. Well, what is power? Well, power in the Nietzschean sense is the flourishing of that life form, right? There's a book called Nietzsche's System that I was very taken by 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I'm older than I thought. Where he makes the argument that Nietzsche is actually referring to drives, not individuals, but to sort of drives or psychological drives. It's an interesting argument, but I think ultimately, whether you ascribe to that or whether you ascribe to it as sort of the will being not so much a property of drives, but a property of beings, then power in Nietzsche's sense is a flourishing of the being. And I think we can see a direct parallel between that and this concept of oikeosis, of being at home in the world. Because if you're at home in the world, you're flourishing, and you're at power. You're not at debility. This also, I think you can also find parallels in, which is not surprising considering there's a strong Nietzsche influence in Heidegger. So Heidegger said that man is the being whose existence is an issue for him. It's an open question. And I think this comes back to the question of why do we need oikeosis, or why do living beings seek oikeosis? Why are we not already at home in the world? And I think the intuition of this is something that is also grasped by Christianity. And so their answer, of course, is that, well, we're not meant to be in this world. We're sort of thrust into it. I think the answer is a little more complex than that, and I'll get to it in a little bit. But this idea of being at issue, it's our existence in the world is given to us as a question. That is how we receive it. We receive it as a question, not as a given. And society, our parents, various religious authorities, there's lots of sources you can go to for answers, but the fact that they're trying to offer an answer is predicated on the idea that the question is open. If the question weren't open, there wouldn't be a need for an answer. It would just be settled. The dog doesn't have the same relationship to its nature as a human being does. A dog is a dog. A human being has to ask the question, what am I? What am I about? What is my life for? And this openness of this question is actually what allows us to seek oikiosis. It's what allows us to attempt to take ownership of the world through reason and through artistic means and other. Ultimately, Heidegger grounds this in what he calls poiesis or poetics, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too. Why is this the case, right? Why are we thrust into this position? Is this just a cosmic joke? Is it part of man's fall? I think that's a coherent idea, right? That the idea, well, we must be from somewhere else. And this is the sort of Gnostic and Christian idea, right? Is that we're from somewhere. The reason that we don't feel at home in the world is because we're not from here. We're from somewhere else. We've sort of fallen into this condition and we have to deal with it. But I actually prefer the more theurgic Neoplatonic answer. So if you look at, say, in Neoplatonism, you'll see a difference of opinion between, say, Proclus and Plotinus. And if you look at Proclus and Iamblichus and the theurgists, there is a concept not so much that one has fallen, but that one is in an intermediary state between the one and the many. And this is how I like to think about it. So when we reason, when we think about things, we are attempting to take a look at the multitude of objects and experiences we have in the world, and we're trying to find their unity, right? We're trying to take sense data, input, and we're trying to unify it in some sense. Well, if you continue that process of unification, knowledge, I think, always follows this sort of unification principle. That's what knowledge is. It's taking diverse things and it's incorporating them into a larger whole that can be conceptualized in sort of a more general rule. So knowledge always approaches the one, the unified, the total. And if you imagined a consciousness that was perfect, it would encompass all of existence, right? It would be a reason so much above our reason that all of existence would be encompassed within it. It would be capable of comprehending everything. And when you go out and you look at the world, you look at stuff, multiplicity, the many. And this is sort of the fundamental distinction in the Platonic school, is that everything exists somewhere in this continuum between the one and the many. In Taoism, there's a reference to the 10,000 things and also to the Tao. Well, the Tao is the whole, is the all, and the 10,000 things is the many, right? It's like, it's not specifically 10,000, it's just a big number, right? So because we are beings in the world, right? We participate in the multiplicity of the world. We're material beings. But we are also able to do this sort of conscious abstraction where we unify things through our reason and through our sense of poetics. I actually think our artistic poetic sense is probably higher than our reason, because ultimately when you try to unify things above a certain level of description, you have to resort to poetics. Poetics gives us a more complete sense of the whole than sort of discursive reason. But this places us in an interesting position where we are midway between the one and the many. We are, and I think this is the sense in which man is said to be an image of God. What does that mean? Made in the divine image. Well, first of all, it's not a concept unique to the Judeo-Christian tradition. That idea of being made in the divine image also appears in especially the late stage Greek philosophical tradition. the Hermetic tradition. Some people say that they borrowed it from Judeo-Christian sources, perhaps. But I think if you look in Plato, I think many of the sort of building block precursors are there. So regardless, I think it's an idea that has resonance. In what way is man made in the divine image? In what way are we an image, a representation of the divine, in the sense that we bridge the complete gap in existence, all the way from the one through our mental, spiritual facilities, all the way down to our participation in the many as incarnate beings. And this being placed in this position necessitates us being thrown into a mixed condition. If we were wholly of the many, if we were purely material beings, then the question of being at home in the world would be irrelevant. You'd be like a rock. You'd go wherever the forces around you pushed you, and you wouldn't be worried about it at all, because what does that even mean? You'd be an inherent part of the material world. Likewise, if you were wholly unified of the one, you wouldn't be subject to becoming and change, and therefore the question of what is being, who am I, how should I live my life, you would be your existence would be fully transparent to you in a way that you wouldn't have to struggle with it. I think that the struggle of our human condition is an inherent it's not a bug, and it's more a feature than it is a bug. It's something that we are tasked with doing as human beings. It's part of our essential nature as people to be thrown into this condition, and you can't get rid of that without removing what it means to be human. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't take a stand on something. Heidegger said that man has to take a stand on his being. We're called to take a stand on our being, but the question remains open. It's never going to be settled. And that's why I think that people who say, oh, well, science one day will solve the question of man's existence, I think that's nonsense. And I also think anyone who is upset that people don't necessarily find their religious or philosophical answers fulfilling is also being a bigoted idiot. The question has to remain open. And if you find something, the important thing is that you find a way to take your stand and also respect the fact that others have to take theirs. Now that's a difficult and complex answer, but I think it's the correct one. Even the phrase image, man is made in the divine image. Obviously, we don't think there's a two-armed, two-legged person sitting on a cloud somewhere. I mean, that's a story for children. So what does it mean to be an image of the divine? Well, an image is a representation, right? So we are a living representation of that in the world. So what are the implications of this for reason and truth? Well, it calls into question the idea that reason will ever provide an absolute, irrefutable, unquestioning framing or conclusion or description of what it means to be a human being, or really to arrive at almost any fact, because reason is always this process whereby we are attempting to relate ourselves to the world and to our own condition as, representations, if you will, of the one. Once again, being placed into this middle position between the one and the many. So reason, therefore, becomes a kind of reconciliation system. And because of that, reason is neither subjective nor objective. And this goes back to the conception of reason that I think is best explained by the American pragmatists, William James and those of his ilk. This is a autochthonous American school of philosophy that was ostensibly founded by Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, and as far as I'm concerned, the sort of the apex was a gentleman by the name of Josiah Royce, who unfortunately is not as well known as he should be. But the pragmatists had this idea that truth is it's a leading process. What does that mean? It means that essentially, this is sometimes crudely put as truth is whatever works, but that's a gross simplification. It would be rather to say that truth is that which leads you to your object. So if you think about it like a map in a woods, right? So let's say you're lost in the woods and you need to find your way out, and you have a map and you follow the map and it gets you out of the woods. Was the map true? Well, yeah, the map was true. It was accurate. It did its job. It got you out of the forest. Now, someone might look at the map and say, yeah, but this map isn't 100% true. The map is not the territory. This map is not the same thing as the forest. And, it's not 100% accurate. Maybe it could be a even very crude map, right? But it could be effective enough to get you out of the forest. So it is true. Now, someone may take the fact that the map is not exact. The map could be drawn any number of ways. Some can be higher resolution, some can be lower resolution. Maybe there are mistakes on the map that are very small but not significant enough. So it's possible to draw a more accurate map or a less accurate map. And they can say, because it's possible to draw a more accurate map or a less accurate map, therefore there is no truth correspondence between the map and the territory. This is the kind of postmodern position, right? That all the results of the reasoning process are purely subjective. There's no necessary correspondence to absolute truth, and they quite, I think, effectively raise the objection to many people who claim to have absolute truth. Like, how do you know that? And how can you explain the variance in interpretation? And I think the pragmatists square the circle. I think they have the right take on it, which is that it's not that there clearly is some kind of ultimate grounding in reality, or reality has an ultimate ground, I should say, and reason clearly helps us navigate the world. But to try to ascribe absolute truth value to reason claims is incorrect. Reason is a method of resolving our relationship between the real and what we want with it. In other words, it is our primary mechanism of the process of oikiosis. It is a kind of bridge building. And because we're bridge building using our reason, it is an interplay between the one and the many. It presupposes the existence of desire as a necessary component for reasons to have meaning. So here we come to the idea that has become quite popularized and taken from quantum mechanics, which is that the act of observation changes what's observed. So in order to have any kind of rational grasp of existence, we have to start with some sort of stance, and that stance is what you are looking for in the world. So coming back briefly to Heidegger, this idea that he had of man dwelling poetically, which I mentioned a little earlier. So Heidegger calls poiesis the way that man primarily dwells in the world, which he ascribes to some sort of artistic, creative impulse. It's something to do with aesthetics. It's a kind of primary stance we take. It's not so much, we start with a certain poetic framing. It has something to do with religion. It's not made especially clear in Heidegger's writing, but I would urge you to, if you're interested, to pick up a copy of I'll put a link to the book below. It's a small book. It's a collection of essays where he talks about the idea of poiesis and also technology, and it's worth reading. But this this idea kind of, I think there's an intuitive sense that we all sort of feel there's a rightness to this, that aesthetics in a certain sense precede our reasoning, which is not to say that aesthetics trumps reason per se, but that we always sort of start with a basic basic is the wrong term, fundamental orientation of ourselves to the world, which is a sometimes called paradigm, and is a very complex thing that cannot simply be reduced to like a set of formula, right? It's closer to religion and myth than it is to science. But how does that work? And what is the role of science? So I came across an idea that I thought was kind of interesting and helped me work my way through this. It's by a gentleman by the name of Lionel Snell, better known by his nom de plume, Ramsey Dukes. And he proposed this, what he calls his compass model. And this was an attempt by him to explain magical thinking. And he draws a little four-way compass, right? And I don't have a graphic because we all know I suck at YouTube, but deal with it. And if you run off it, maybe I'll figure out a way to put one in post. We'll see if I can figure that out. If you look at the compass, one axis is between external orientation and internal orientation, right? So looking out at the world or introspection, right? Out, in, got it. The other axis is between what he calls reasoning and feeling, but by feeling he means something like inherent internal pattern recognition. So his framing of feeling is our ability to instinctively sense a pattern in events and to react to it. It's a kind of fast thinking. It's not opposed to thinking. It's a different kind of thought. We get scared because there's all these little things in the environment that add up that tell us danger. And even if we're not aware of it sort of cognitively, we pick up on it as organisms. And likewise, if we feel loved, it's all these little things that add up to this sensation of love. So it's pattern recognition, right? So if those are the axes on the compasses, as you move in any direction, you enter one of the four quadrants delineated by the compass. And those four quadrants are types of modes of being, right? Now, he doesn't lay this out, but I think if you're kind of getting what I'm laying down already, the question of what the center of the compass is, well, that's Oikeosis, right? That's will to power. That's taking your stand on being. That's something I like to call primary appropriation, right? And if you move out into the world, you're looking out into the world, and you're using discursive reasoning, well, you're operating in a scientific modality. If you are looking inward at yourself and you are attempting, specifically your inspiration, not necessarily your psychology, which would be looking at yourself as an object externally, so to speak, but your own process of inspiration, your own inner world, your aspirations, your dreams, your goals, and you're using reason to do so. He refers to this as religious thinking, but I think it would be more accurately to call it philosophical thinking, or in a religious mode, perhaps you might call it theological thinking. And then if you're moving in a direction where you're basing your processing ability on your feeling, your pattern recognition, but you're looking outward into the world, you're making art. And if you're looking inward to your own inspiration and you're using pattern recognition, feeling to grapple with it, you're making art. If you're looking outward into the world, you're trying to manipulate the world, you're trying to get information from the world, but you're using feeling, you're operating in a magical mode. So that's his compass model, which I thought I'd just throw to you. But this, I think, raises some interesting questions too, which is, what does that say about the usefulness of science, the usefulness of art? And it would argue that art is not so much poetics, is not our primary mode of grappling with the world, as Heidegger says, nor is science, nor is philosophy necessarily. What is our primary mode? So if all of these are oikiosis, or oikiosis is the center out of which all of these grow, primary appropriation is the center out of which all of these grow, what does it mean for us to be operating in this primary appropriative manner? What is it? Is there a function to that? And I think there is. Play. Play is the original state through which we experience oikiosis. There is a very good book on play and the history of play. It's a little dry. It's very academic, but it's good. And it is this book. It's called Homo Ludens, The Study of the Play Element in Culture by Johan Huizinga. It is translated. I believe it was originally in German or Dutch. But Huizinga makes the argument that culture emerges out of a state of play. That play is the primary way that man has built up the artifacts and the processes of culture, something like the play instinct. And if you look at children, when children are engaged in play, there is a seriousness to what they do. It's not art the way that, say, making a painting is. It's not reason per se. It's not magic. And it's not religion or philosophy. It's something else. Play is its own mode. That is one we have as a culture often, as we grow into adulthood, we often forget the joys of play. Play has an ambiguous seriousness about it, right? Story is in many ways an emergent property of spontaneous play. Traditions, as we inherit them, are either houses of play, like particular types of games operating in a particular mode, or quite frequently are tombs of play. The original play aspect of it has been forgotten. And I think even philosophical traditions can be looked at as a kind of mental play. And there's different kinds of games, right? If you're playing tag and someone else wants to play catch, well, you're playing different games. And that's, I think, how we maybe can look at traditions. Traditions are modes of playing. And I think what we're seeing right now is in Western culture, we are experiencing a break in the game we're playing. And I think that's part of the reason we're seeing so much uncomfortableness and anger and strife and we're just playing different games. What do I mean by that? I'm gonna read a section of this if you'll indulge me here, right? Civilization will, in a sense, always be played according to certain rules, and true civilization will always demand fair play. Fair play is nothing less than good faith expressed in play terms. Hence, the cheat or the spoil sport shatters civilization itself. To be a sound culture-creating force, this play element must be pure. It must not consist in the darkening or debasing of standards set up by reason, faith, or humanity. It must not be a false seeming, a masking of political purposes behind the illusion of genuine play forms. True play knows no propaganda. Its aim is in itself, and its familiar spirit is happy inspiration. So, if we think of culture, civilization as an outgrowth of play or a form of play, I think what we're seeing today is that the games or the civilization game has at least two and possibly more variations that are splitting away from each other. The idea that play has to remain in good spirit, we're sort of losing that good spirit, at least politically, between, if you're going to have big camps, at least in America here, right? Like the right and the left. It's much more complicated than that, but we'll just draw the line there. The sense of that we're all playing the same game together is no longer the case. And this, I think, is an outgrowth of the failure of the game that we've been playing for the last 2,000 years, which I think ultimately is the religious game. It's in the West, it's been the Christian and to a lesser extent the uh, the larger Abrahamic game. Obviously, if you're growing up in another country, you have different situations that have a different culture, different situations. I can't speak to that, but the game is no longer being played by the same rules, and we're kind of unsure where to go from here. Um, and this is a problem for our ability to engage in the primary appropriation of homesteading, of making ourselves at home in the world, of pursuing Oikeosis and achieving Eudaimonia. Uh, how are you, if Eudaimonia is winning at the game of Oikeosis, how can you play the game of Oikeosis when you don't even know what the rules are anymore? The right spirit that one should play the game in, if that makes sense. I hope that was a lot of stuff. I covered a lot of ground in that. When I wrote out the notes for this, I was sort of running down this chain of thought very quickly, and I feel like I ran through it pretty quickly. But this video has already been 36 minutes, so I don't know how much longer you guys are going to indulge me on this. Anyway, so what's my point? My payoff to this is when you leverage this concept of Oikeosis, I think that you can use it as a clarifying device. And the good news in all this is, at the very least, we've defined the problem. And I'm an engineer by trade. I mean, that's what I do for a living. So, a problem defined and a problem understood is a problem half solved, or at least we're on the way to solving the problem. Before that, we don't even have any hope. We have to engage in exploratory testing. And I think the point here is, if we see this need to take a stand on our being, on our existence, that this is an open question. It's one we can't get away from. It's a task that's thrown onto us. And the way in which we do so is as a kind of game playing with life. Life becomes a kind of sacred game. But we need rules, and we need modes, and we need a way of approaching and understanding that. And we've lost that, or we're in the process of losing it, or it's collapsing. We're sort of holding on to rules from old games we used to play, but the context of the game has changed and we don't get it anymore. If we understand that that's the problem we face now as modern men and women in 2021, at the very least we know where to begin to look. Because it tells us ultimately that until we solve that problem, until we find a game worth playing, politics will not save us, right? And I also don't think that just picking up the game that we played before will save us. I don't think we can go back to being men in the 1700s or the 1600s. I saw there was a post I came across on Twitter. It was an article that was written. If anyone follows me on Twitter, I commented based on it. And the author of the article was making a point of, like, say, the ideas of Jordan Peterson, whom I've mentioned before, this sort of reframing of the Judeo-Christian narrative in psychological terms as containing psychological truth. And they pointed out, I think quite rightly, that there is a big gulf between this and the original sense of religion as an absolute transcendent truth, and that you can't just reframe one view of the world, one form of poiesis, and say, well, yeah, but it's psychologically true. It's just good psychology. It doesn't have the same import. It doesn't have the same demands, the same punch. And I think that's fair. That's a fair criticism. But I also think that the problem remains, which is, you can't, we know too much. We've seen too much variation in the world. We cannot uphold, let's just say, I don't mean to pick on Judeo-Christian belief. It can be any culture, any religious group. But let's just say the Bible, right? If we agree that that was the central organizing narrative of Western civilization for 2,000 years. Okay, fine. But there was a time at which one could read that or receive it from those who could read it, and you could believe in it wholeheartedly. You could play that game. You would go, yeah, that's the game. That's the rules. That's what life is about. That's the truth. The truth. I don't think you can do that anymore. You can believe it. You can say, I have faith in it. I choose to live my life that way. I feel there's truth in there in some other sense. But I don't, because unless you're sort of engaged in this kind of rigid, dinosaur bones were put there by the devil to trick people. Unless you're engaged in that level of intellectual, I don't know what to call it, self-delusion, clearly you can't say that this is absolute 100% literal truth in every way. Okay, it's truth in another sense. In what sense? How is it true? What parts are true? How should they be interpreted? Now we have to ask, what question are we asking there? What are the rules of this game? If this is the rule book for the game, okay, great, or rule book's the wrong term. If this is the game we're playing, right? If we're going to play the Jewish game or the Christian game or the Muslim game or the Hindu game, what are the rules of the game? We don't know. We're going to play the atheist game. What are the rules of that game? We don't know what the rules of that game are either. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling a little bit. I hope you guys are well. We'll talk about this more as I think the year goes on. I don't mean to throw anybody into a state of existential doubt. The only thing I'm trying to do is to better identify the conditions of modern life, and hopefully we can start to work towards something approaching a better way of playing. So enjoy playing in the world.